Hi, and welcome to another podcast, video, whatever you call these things, and welcome back. I hope you recover from the last one with our interview from the representative of Yamina, which was a little bit crazy, but I think it was fun. Today we have Miri Eisen, who is a friend, a colleague, and pure genius on everything to do with the Middle East. And if you've ever heard her speak or not heard her, you just hear her. Miri, first of all, welcome. Welcome
to our pleasure to be here.
Now, if you are not on this planet or have just landed or been born and not heard who Miri Eisen is, one, she's brilliant. Second of all, she works on the faculty of the IDC in Herzliya, which is a great university. They got university status now, I think. There's a great university.
They have. Yeah. They're very proud of it.
So, by the way, if you're thinking of ever coming to Israel and studying for a while, one, sign up for Miri's course, and two, recommend the IDC. She teaches graduates and undergraduates there. She's also an associate at the International Institute of Counter-Terrorism. She has, what's interesting is her background in intelligence, security and diplomacy. She spent 20 years in the army, which in the Israeli Defense Forces, and she served as intelligence officer in combat units, personal assistant to the director of military intelligence and deputy head of combat intelligence corps. She's the first woman, and again, we've talked about this before, there are not enough women in Israeli politics, in Israeli military. We kind of do macho in this country. Like, seriously. She was the first woman to achieve the rank of colonel in the IDF. After retiring, you've retired? You're too young. After retiring from
so long ago.
After retiring from the military, Eisen served as the Israeli government spokesman during the Second Lebanon War in 2006. For those of you slightly older, and you're probably thinking, that's where I've seen her before. That's where she was. She was in front of the media. And also as the international press secretary to Prime Minister Ehud Olmert during the peace process in 2007. So with all of that, thank you for joining us today.
It's wonderful to be here, Neil, and I'm so glad that we're getting the opportunity to have a conversation, especially I think it's going to be the British Ole accent versus the American Ola accent, as we each have our backgrounds.
And the terrible thing is, we've both been in the country for a few decades now, at least, and it makes me sound intelligent, that's the main thing. Let's go up to the north, because there's been so many, there's been a back and forth between Hezbollah, between Israel, etc. We've also got Iran threatening again. We've got a whole, what seems to be a war of words breaking out there. Now, what's going on? And can you perhaps tie that into the change of government in the United States? Because we also we've moved from Trump, we've moved over to Biden, which is a very different approach towards the Iranians. What's happening?
So first of all, thank you for immediately going up north. I feel to a certain degree, we need to prepare ourselves, you and me, Neil, the world out there, for some action. And when I say action, that usually has violence within it, that to me is a question of time that's going to take place up north. This both has to do with the change of government in the United States, the change of administration, but it also has nothing to do with the change of administration there. It has to do with local aspects. Lebanon is the country directly north of Israel. You say a country and you think country, government, people, we immediately look at what we know. But in this case, Lebanon is something different even within the Middle East, because it has a government, it has a military, but it also has a terror army, Hezbollah, that has grown and grown and grown over every decade. You know, we made Aliyah decades ago, Hezbollah was founded decades ago, and it keeps growing. And it is, to a certain degree, its position inside Lebanon. It hasn't taken over Lebanon, even though it could, but its position within Lebanon as an Arabic Lebanese Shiite speaking organization, terror army, as I defined it, as the chief of staff of Israel defined it, and what it wants to do both in Lebanon and in the Middle East.
So
Hezbollah has been
if I can interject there for 1 second, can you be more specific as far as the position of Hezbollah in Lebanon? In other words, it seems to have created a country within a country in many ways, or a government within a government. It has its own communication network. It has its own army. It's not really accountable to anybody. How much influence does it have, both political and militarily?
Inside Lebanon, the main impact is in the Shiite areas, but that's one of the challenges of Lebanon. It is the only country on earth that the last census, counting all the people inside, demographics, the last census was in 1932. Okay, that's like ridiculous. That was 90 years ago. And the demographics of Lebanon have changed so much that when I say it's only in the Shiite areas, probably the Shiite areas are over 50% of Lebanese population. So there is a real issue here. They hold and participate, Hezbollah, both in the domestic politics. It's kind of like making themselves kosher in our terms. They stepped in, they joined into politics, but they do it slightly different than perhaps what we think of in democracies. Meaning, you, Neil, disagree with me, Miri? No problem. On Hezbollah, I blow you up. The person who's going to be instead of you may think twice before they disagree with me, so that they're in very violent politics. They act within the domestic politics, using their terror army, using their communication network, using that strongest aspect of the bigger the lie, the more you stand for it, the more people believe it. And it's working in Lebanon, not just on the Shiite population.
So can you give us a sense of, one, their capability? You're mentioning Lebanon a lot, but I think everyone is also looking at Syria and on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights, and the influence there also of Iran, of Shiite groups in Iran, and its connection together also with Hezbollah. And we're seeing weapons coming in from Iran, a massive military build-up there. What's the connection between what's going on in Syria and going on in Lebanon? And what is the actual capability? I mean, is it a serious threat?
So here I am going to connect this into what you initially asked also with the connection to the change in administration. Iran has had an extreme Islamic regime for many years. Today we're talking in decades, for decades. That Islamic regime, this isn't the Iranian people per se, it is a regime that rules over a country that has a majority of Shiites. This regime has tried to export its capabilities, its Islamic revolution for decades. It has been more successful in that export over the last decade, the decade of what's been going on throughout the Middle East, both in Iraq and in Syria in that war, and in Lebanon with Hezbollah. And Iran has always been there to fund, to train, to arm, not just Hezbollah in Lebanon, because Hezbollah is Arabic-speaking Lebanese Shiites. It's not an Iranian outpost in Lebanon. And they fund the Houthis and arm the Houthis in Yemen. The Houthis are not Iranian Persian-speaking Shiites. They are Yemenite-speaking Shiites. And the same with Arabic-speaking Iraqis in Iraq. And I say that because it's part of the challenge of where we are. Iran, for the last 4 years, went through a different US administration that addressed the Iranian, both Islamic regime and quest for nuclear weapons in a different way from before. And in the change of administration now, everybody is putting out what I'm going to call cards on the table. It's a little bit about playing poker, and I'm not a good poker player, okay? It's a little bit about who blinks first. And in the Middle East, countries, leaders, terror armies, they all notice who plays poker, who blinks first. Hezbollah is part of that. Iran is part of that. Again, it's the Islamic regime in Iran. I'm not talking as much about the people of the area. I'm talking about leaders, about terror armies, about the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and they are right now putting out their cards and their tables with this new administration, because the administration, not having said it, but is about to take action with the issue of the nuclear agreement that the former administration left.
Let us go even deeper. What are the factions within Hezbollah? In other words, we love talking Hamas in the south. We love talking about Palestine. We always use these generalizations. What is the faction? Are there factions within Hezbollah fighting each other? Are there factions which are more aggressive, less aggressive, so on and so forth?
It's interesting. I don't think I've ever thought of Hezbollah as being full of factions in the way that we're going to see that both within Hamas and within the Palestinian arena. And there's so many denominations and factions within Lebanon. Hezbollah represents Lebanese Arabic Shiites.
But are there wings? Are there wings within Hezbollah? In other words, are there?
So there's a political wing and there's a military wing. And within the military wing, there are what I would call the regular conscripted army, because it's it's hard for me to call them just volunteers. It's part of very dominant part of the Shiite population, both in the south of Lebanon and in the Bekaa Valley and within the city of Beirut. And the south of Lebanon is the area that borders Israel. But I can't think of a moderate portion of Hezbollah. There's a practical, realistic part. In that sense, people like to compare it to the mafia because it gives a clear sense. They Hezbollah, give you something. They don't just take. They come and they say, here, I'll open up health clinics. I'll build schools. I'll give you social welfare. And your kids are going to come and serve within my military terror armor, obviously called resistance, not military terror. So there's
how much has that been challenged, this idea of it's good to support us? How much is that now being challenged because of the massive explosion, if you remember, that we saw in the port in Lebanon, and people starting to point the finger, and we saw it on Lebanese television, open criticism. I think there was one guy, the person we saw is now not alive, but this idea of people starting to point the finger at Hezbollah saying, hold on, they're playing games with civilians here.
So contrary to what we think, this is not something new, Neil. There was a person who pointed a finger at Hezbollah and said, what you're doing is not okay inside Lebanon. And he was the president of Lebanon. And let's take a guess. I'm being very cynical with my American accent right now. What happened to him? Oh, that would be Rafik Hariri, president of Lebanon, who was blown up in a very harsh way, and in the aftermath of everything going on there, both because of the Syrian involvement. But that's exactly what Hezbollah does. And that was years ago. Okay, that was in 2005, and he was blown into itty-bitty pieces. His son now is prime minister, sorry, not president, prime minister of Lebanon. Right. My mistake in my wording. And so when we talk about that inside Lebanon, Hezbollah has strong-armed its way and gotten stronger. So there are absolutely voices that oppose.
Can you give us
killed.
Right? Can you give us a sense? I mean, I think I was on the Golan Heights a few weeks back, and you look into Lebanon, you look into Syria, and it's fascinating seeing it on the ground there. When we look onto the Syrian side of the Golan Heights, how much is the build-up of pro-Iranian Shiite groups? How much is there a real danger that the Syrian side of the Golan Heights will become another South Lebanese border, if you like?
I'm going to sound the alarms. The Golan Heights now is infested with Iranians, Shiite Iranian-backed groups, and from the point of view of Israel, with Hezbollah being the commando high-level units that know how to train all of the others. Hezbollah is the one that's training local Syrian military Who ever heard of such a thing, that the terror army from Lebanon is the one that is now building the new Syrian military post-Civil War? Not that the Civil War is totally over there. So when I'm looking into the Golan Heights right now, I am seeing local towns, local villages, and that buildup, every town, every village with its outer forces that are the common denominators, that overwhelmingly they are Shiite, but they can speak Arabic or Persian, Urdu or Pashto. They're coming from Yemenite. They're coming from all over the Muslim Shiite world.
You sounded very alarmist at the beginning. Yet, if I was Hezbollah, I didn't want to press the button and start a war with Israel now, because I would want to continue that build-up. On the other hand, I'd like to have a limited provocation because it's good for my credibility. Is that what we're realistically looking for, or looking at in the next couple of years at least, until perhaps, in your own words, it's too late?
If they don't act, then they won't get the backing. They need to show their strength. So those little bits of provocation are certainly what they would like to do. Neil, you and I both understand that when somebody pokes the finger, when somebody starts by doing, we say provocative. Provocative is a violent act. It's going to be firing and killing people, civilians, soldiers. It doesn't matter. It's going to be in the state of Israel, and Israel will respond. Just like Israel would not like or aspire to a full-scale war, but we are going to defend ourselves. When Hezbollah does that provocation, when Hezbollah tries to poke in the eye, but not to let it expand, neither side can know how it will escalate. And that challenge, that threat is with us right now at a very heightened level.
And hold on, to be a little bit more cynical, and it's very dangerous perhaps.
Always important to be cynical.
Be cynical, you're never disappointed. Isn't that more dangerous even in the weeks before a general election? Because security issues certainly serve the interests of the right in Israel.
It does, but if there's one subject that we're actually united on in Israel, as opposed to the so many divisive subjects that we have, is about the threat to the north. People who strongly support two-state resolution, and you would never call them right-wing, still totally support not just Israel's right to defend itself against this terror army, which is sitting inside Lebanon and attacking Israel, but that whole arena of Hezbollah, Syria, Iranian Shiites. On that one, there's more common ground. Where left-wing center people may differ is on the idea of returning to an agreement with Iran about the nuclear issue specifically. But that's not the same as assessing and understanding this harsh threat that we have on the northern border.
So what was there were many reports in foreign press about Israel providing vaccines for Syria, Russian vaccines, in return for a prisoner return. What's Israel's interest in that? Because here we bring in the issue of the Russians, which is a delicate relationship between Israel, Russia, Iran, Russia as a part of having dialogue with Iran. How do you see that playing into the Israeli-Russian relations in the north? Because that's also key. The Russians are key.
They are absolutely key, and as such, I view all of these events of the last week as being about Israeli-Russian relations and not being about Israel-Syria, Israel-Hezbollah, and sadly not even about an Israeli citizen who seemingly both has an opinion and took action, and none of us are talking about her, which is fine, because Israel has all sorts of citizens. You don't get to pick and choose and say, and that one I am divorcing. I want to go off topic to come back and to explain. Mordechai Vanunu, who was put on trial in Israel as the seller, according to the Sunday Times, of Israel's nuclear secrets, Israel never took away his citizenship. We put him in jail. So I say just in that sense, everybody are citizens. You can have citizens in jail. In Israel, people in jail are allowed to vote. Not every country gives that. When you've been accused of a crime and you're in jail and you're still allowed to vote in elections. And I say all of that because this play out of Israel-Russia, of talking to President Putin, what was exposed, that the prime minister spoke to Putin, that there was actions going on that had to do with Russia, Syria. This is about Russia's position in the Middle East. It's about Russia being somebody that you have to take into account if you want to do anything with Syria and Iran. That's a message to the US administration. It's about if you want to try and face the challenge in the Middle East of this Shiite crescent, of the challenges that we have, please don't ignore Russia. Now, what I'm saying to you right now is really hard to swallow. Who wants to bring Putin in? Who wants to address Russia? But if you want to address these issues, you need to say that. So in its own way,
is there a connection between if you have a strong president, and I know we're going into places even more dangerous than Southern Lebanon, which is talking American politics with an American audience. And I think I'm going to have to use those words, Trump and Biden, but we'll get out of this conversation safely, I promise you, is the less, I don't want to use the word aggressive, but the less strident, the less forceful an American presidency or government is against Iran, the more government wants to or believes that they can talk to the Iranians, does the role of Russia become more important? In other words, is there a seesaw type relationship between the two?
Neil, you and I both do a lot with terminology and words, because I'm going to push back on the way that you asked the question.
Feel free.
Was he more forceful? Did his actions bring about POTUS 45, the change in the Middle East we were all waiting for? Is Iran less nuclear after 4 years of the forceful? Now, I, for a moment, am not belittling many things that for me as an Israeli are incredibly important, and I'm not sure I would call them forceful. I would just call them actions in a very different way, both in Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, let alone with the agreements in the Gulf, etc. But when it comes to Iran, I'm going to push back on that. I don't think that the last 4 years showed that it was more effective than dialogue. There's no question whatsoever that we're going from what I'm going to call dialogue to sanctions to dialogue. Sanctions, they haven't yet removed the sanctions.
So what you're saying is you can only talk to at the end of the day, you're going to have to talk to the Iranians.
At the end of the day, you're going to have to talk to all sorts, because if you don't, you have to take action. And POTUS 45 did not take action against the Iranians. Sanctions is an easy American way. That's not a physical action. The only
But it does put pressure. It does put pressure on the regime.
You can think so, but the only ones that have actively been violently in confrontation against the Iranians, with the exception of Qasem Soleimani, which is an enormous act, that was an enormous act a year ago, has been Israel for the last decade. We have been in a direct confrontation, certainly from 2016-17, as the Iranian presence inside Syria became more and more. We're in an active confrontation with them via Hezbollah, via Syria, via their own presence inside Syria. I'm not belittling. I think that Qasem Soleimani was an enormous act that many people in the US may not understand, but it was taking a stand. And that was one act. But it didn't stop them from trying to go down the nuclear path. It didn't prevent that. And the question is, do you want to engage or not engage? I'm not against, God, now I'm going to do a double negative, right? You can do actions and not engage in dialogue. But then you have to take actions, and you have to be aware that if you don't actually step in and stop Iran from doing it, either by action or by dialogue, guess what? They're going to keep on doing it. And that's action in Iran.
The reality is it really possible to stop Iran today? Or can we just delay nuclear capability? Do we have to?
We've been talking about the nuclear capability from the 1990s, so people have been getting tired of it. But that's exactly the thing. We've been delaying it, and it has changed the Middle East. And if we can keep on delaying it for another year or two, Wouldn't you rather be on board? Do you want them to be nuclear now? 3 or 4, even better. You don't believe them, but it has delayed them until now. And again, these aren't easy choices. I'm not saying this is the happily ever after and this is the harsh one. These are challenging, realistic choices. But I, as an Israeli, do not want Iran to go nuclear. And if I can delay it 6 months or a year or 2 years, because right now I'm not delaying it.
Okay, Miri, our common enemy is time. Thank you very, very, very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure, and we haven't had a cup of coffee for a while, so definitely when the coffee shops open up again, have you had your injections? Are you vaccinated?
I'm already post 2 injections.
So am I.
My entire family, we're all very, very happy.
That's great. And you know what? I never had a British accent before I had the vaccination. Now, I'm only joking. Go get vaccinated if you're listening. Don't listen to anyone who says it's dangerous. We need to do that. Again, so thank you, Miri, for joining us. If you enjoyed this podcast and video, depending how you're listening or watching it, 1, press the subscribe button below. 2, forward it to other people. And if you're watching and wondering how to listen to it, it is available on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and everywhere else there are possibly podcasts. Miri, thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see each other.
Pleasure.
Again.